Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava, Metzia, Daf Tzadichet. Today's stuff is sponsored by Rebecca and Ezra Darshan in loving memory of Helene Isaacs on her 24th year at side on Yom Yerushalayim. She was an optimist who loved learning and would be so proud of all the women learning Daf. Happy Yom Yerushalayim to everyone. We're going to get started now. Today we have pictures, kind of like way back in Yavama. We have a presentation on Canvas, so you can find it on our website on today's Daf. And if you're listening to a podcast, you can look in, there's a link to the photos. It's just a PDF, not a presentation, but it's all the same. And you can find that in the details of the podcast. We're going to get started now with a review of where we were yesterday. It's a pretty straightforward daf, but with a lot of different details that will follow. So we had three cases in the Mishna, three situations that happened, which is we rented and borrowed all in one arrangement, either half day. Okay, half day was a borrowing, half day was a renting, where I rented from you, let's say, or 1 day renting, 1 day borrowing, and the animal dies and we don't know which day. Those were the first two cases. Was it the day that it was she'ela, which means if it was onus, I'll be obligated. If it was the day I was renting, if it's onus, I'm not obligated. So obviously you're going to claim it was on the day of onus, and you're going to claim it was the day I was borrowing, in which case I'm chayav, and I'm going to claim it was the day I was renting, in which case I exempt myself. And then we're going to have a third case where this could happen, where there were two animals. One, I rented two animals from you. One I rented, one I borrowed. Sorry, I didn't say it right. I took two animals from you. One was rental, one was a borrowing, and one of them died. And then the question is, which one died? So we had, those were three cases, of which there's four permutations of what our claims could be. Our claims are always going to be the same. The question is just, are you definite about your claim? And I just say, I don't know. Maybe it was the time it was rented. Maybe it was the time it was borrowed. Or I say, I know for sure. And you say, I don't know. Or we both say we're sure, or we both say, I don't know. So we're now going back to case number one, where you say for sure it was the time when it was borrowed and I have to pay. And I say, no, I don't know. Maybe it was borrowed. Maybe it was rented. Malach in the Mishna is, I have to pay. So comes the Gemara and asks, wait a minute, does this raise a difficulty with Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Yochanan, who both said that in a case where you claim I owe you money, and I say, I'm not sure, I might have paid you back, I don't have to pay you, because even though I'm unsure of my claim and you're sure of your claim, we always leave the money where it is. We retain the status quo unless we have proof otherwise. That's what Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Yochanan say. Whereas the other opinions, Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Yehuda, say, no, if you're definitive and I'm suffix, then your definitive claim overrides my suffix. But Rabbi Nachman and Rabbi Yochanan don't think that, so how could they possibly explain the Mishnah, to which we finished yesterday by saying they must claim that it's a case where, and then we're going to have to figure out how this could be, it's a case where you have to take an oath. In other words, I would have had to take an oath. Why would I have to take an oath? Well, for example, in a moda b'miktzah case, if I admit to part of your claim and deny the other part, then I have to take an oath. Now, we've learned already before, we're not going to go all the way back to moda b'miktzah, but that's a basic. Once I'm obligated an oath, now in this case, I can't take an oath because it's not a classic moda b'miktzah where I say, yes, I owe you. I definitely agree that I owe you half the money, but I know I don't owe you the other half. And then I can take an oath and say, I know I don't owe you the other half. But if I don't know, I can't take an oath. I can't take an oath on something I'm not sure about. The whole point of an oath is to say, I know for sure. So since I can't take the oath because I'm not sure of my claim, I now have to pay. Because anytime when you have to, yes, it's true. The burden of proof is on the person trying to take out the money, take the money out of the hands of the other. But if I can't take an oath, then that overrides. If I'm supposed to take an oath and I don't, then I have to pay. And that must be the case of the Mishnah. So now the Gemara is going to say, and I think we read this already yesterday, but we'll read it again, the very end of Tzad Zayin and Bet. What's a classic case of a shevua? Rava. Like Rava says, and we already discussed this, you say you owe me, I owe you 100. I say I only owe you 50. Bashar eini yodea. Now we're going to have a case. It's not a moda b'miktzah. It's a moda b'miktzah with the inability to take the oath, because I say I don't really know about the other 50. I have a vague recollection. Maybe I paid you back, but I'm not sure. So mitoch she'eno yachol lishava mishalem. In that case, we would have a situation where, since normally I would have to take an oath, but since I can't take the oath, I have to pay. So now we're going to have to apply that to our Mishnah. And here comes our presentation for today. I'm going to share screen, share the presentation with you. So now comes our 2 cows, okay? Mishkacha la reisha b'tarte v'seifa b'tzlat. Now the Mishnah had a case of 1 cow in case number 1 and 2, and 2 cows in case number 3. But now we're going to have to add another cow to each situation so that we can have a situation where there's a moda b'miktzat. There's only 1 cow, then there's no moda b'miktzat because we have a total disparity between what one says and what the other says. But as soon as we add 2 cows, we could say on 1 cow I admitted, on the other cow I didn't. So that's why the ratio is going to have 2 cows, and the seifa, meaning the third case, remember there's 3 cases. So the first 2 cases are considered the ratio because they're basically one and the same. I borrowed it for half day and I rented it for half day. I borrowed it for 1 day, I rented it for the other day. It's all one and the same. In the case where we started with 2 cows, we're going to have 3 cows. So we'll get there in a minute. Reisha betarte. So the first case has 2 cows. Da amarle. Shtei parot masarti lecha. So you say to me, I gave you 2 cows. Pal gedioma b'sheila, pal gedioma b'schirut. Each one I lent you for half a day and you rented them for the other half. Inami, alternatively, chad yoma b'sheila, chad yoma b'schirut. Case 2 in the Mishnah, 1 day was borrowed and the other day they were rented. Both cows, same thing. Umetu t'ravayu b'idan she'ela. Now you claim, I didn't put this on the chart, it wasn't necessary, but you claim both died when they were borrowed. And therefore, again, I owe you 2 cows worth of damages, right? Of death, because it was rented. It was borrowed, and I'm responsible then. Va'amar le'shoel. Now here comes my claim. Remember, it has to be a moda b'mitzvah. I have to admit to part and deny the other half, but my denial again is in the form of I don't know. So amar le'shoel. Chada'in. I agree with you about the first one. B'idan she'ela meta. You're right. The first one actually died during the half a day or the day that I was actually borrowing it, and I owe you all the money for that. But the second one, lo yadana, ibi idan she'ela meta, ibi idan schirut meta. But the second one who died, I don't know. Maybe it was rented, maybe it was borrowed at the time it died. I don't remember, or I don't know. Now, this is a perfect case of moda b'mitzvah now, but you see why the simple reading of the Mishnah couldn't possibly be a moda b'mitzvah. Again, this is all just to explain the Gemara according to Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yochanan, because according to the other opinion, it's fine. As long as one is definitive in their claim and the other one is not, we go by the definitive claim and we can make the borrower pay. But in this case, according to Rav Nachman, you wouldn't be able to only if it's moda b'mitzvah, and then we have to add this another cap. And again, demitoch she'eno yachol lishava meshalem. So since this is moda b'mitzvah, then I obviously pay for the first para, the first cow. The second cow is a doubt. Well, I'm supposed to take an oath. I can't take an oath. So then I'm going to have to pay because you have a definitive claim and I can't take my oath. Seifa b'tzlat. Now let's go to case number 2, or case number 3 really in the Mishnah. Now the case was, according to the Mishnah, there were 2 cows. 1 was rented, 1 was borrowed. But in order to explain that there's a moda b'miktzat, we're going to have to say the following. Seifa b'tzlat, da'amarle, there's 3 cows. And you say to me, shalosh parot natati lecha. Shall I gave you 3 cows. Shtayim b'sheila, ve'echa b'schirut. 2 were borrowed, 1 was rented. Umetu hane tarte d'sheila. Now, 2 out of the 3 died. So you say to me, obviously, you're going to claim it's the 2 that were borrowed. But and again, you're definitive in your claim because that's what we're discussing. Case, right? The option permutation number 1 in the Mishnah where you come with a definitive claim, and I say I don't know. But Amar shoel in chada d'sheila meta. I say, listen, you're right. That, well, first of all, it has to be, if 2 were b'sheila and 1 was b'schirut, then for sure, if 2 of the parot died, obviously 1 of them is b'sheila, because there's only 1 that could possibly be the one rented. So I say, you're right. 1 of them that died was the one I borrowed, was one of the ones I borrowed. But the second one that died, lo yadana d'sheila meta udekaima d'schiruti, I don't know. Was it the one I borrowed that died and the one I rented is still alive? Or maybe it's the one I rented that died, and the one that's left is the one I borrowed. And if that was the case, the last option, then I'm not obligated. So again, what do we have? A moda b'miktzat, because I admitted that the one that I borrowed had died, one of them. About the second one that died, I don't know. And I should take an oath because it's a moda b'miktzat. Since I can't take the oath, I have to pay. Okay, that's all fine and good. But now we're going to complicate things one more level. Okay, you might remember that we had this opinion of Rami bar Hama. This is way, way back in the beginning of the Masechet. I'll stop the presentation for a minute and we'll go back. Le Rami bar Hama de Amal. Arba'a shomrim. He had a unique halacha about the 4 shomrim. If you remember, the whole pasuk of Moda b'miktzat, where it says kihu asher yomar kihu zeh, which they explain means Moda b'miktzat. Okay, that again, if I admit to part of a claim, I have to take an oath. The whole pasuk comes in the pasuk of shomrim. And some people say, oh, it's just in the wrong place. Like it got in here, but it doesn't really belong here. And some people say, which is Rami bar Hama, that no, Moda b'miktzat is in the Arba shomrim because a shomer is not going to ever pay unless, and then he says it like this, there has to be kfira b'miktzat v'hoda'a b'miktzat. There has to be part of the claim the shomer denies, I don't owe you the money, and part of a claim the shomer admits to, right? Which is a very unique approach, because to say that that's, the shomrim don't have to pay unless that's true. But he says the shomrim only pay if there's kfira b'miktzat and hoda'a b'miktzat. There has to be a denial and there has to be an admission. So part has to be denied completely, part has to be admitted completely. So according to Rami bar Hama, we're now going to have to explain Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Nachman how they read our Mishnah with Rami bar Hama, because we're going to have to add a whole other element of kfira b'miktzat, of complete denial of part. To do that, we're going to have to add another cow. Okay, and that's going to be the next series of pictures. So let's put back up okay. So Rami bar Hama da'amar ba'ashomrim tzrichim kfira b'miktzat v'hoda'a b'miktzat. You have to partially deny a claim and partially admit a claim. Mishkacha l'reisha b'tzlat v'seifa ba'arba. So we're going to have to now add, forget, there's not 1 cow and 2 cows. There's not just 2 cows and 3 cows. There's 3 cows and 4 cows in the cases in the Mishnah. Reisha b'tzlat, the first case, the first 2 cases, the half day, or 1 day, is da'amar le shalosh parot natati l'chad. You say, listen, I gave you 3 cows. Palgid yoma b'sheila, palgid yoma b'shlirit. Each one I gave to you half day for borrowing, half day for renting. Inami, or alternatively, chad yoma b'sheila, chad yoma b'shlirit. Or I gave you 1 day for renting, the next day was borrowed, okay, or vice versa, it doesn't matter. Umetu tlat kulu bidan sheila. Now all 3 died. And you claim they all died in the hours that, or the day that they were borrowed. And therefore I owe you full damages. Va'amar le shoel, and I say, now we have to have a kfira b'miktzat, a hoda'a b'miktzat, and then our case that the Mishna says of, I don't know. So chada lo ayu dvarim me'olam. I don't even know what you're talking about. You didn't even give me the 3rd one. There was no or first. You didn't give me the first cow. I deny it completely. That's kfira b'miktzat. Called b'miktzat, but it means out of my whole claim, I have 1 piece that I deny completely. Okay. And next one, v'chada, about the second one. And you're right, b'idan she'ela meita. The second one actually died during the time I was borrowing it, and I'll pay you completely for that one. And that becomes a moda b'miktzat. So we've got our kfir b'miktzat, moda b'miktzat, and now we get to what the Mishnah actually said, which is idach, the 3rd one, lo yadana, iba she'ela meita, iba b'idan she'ela meita, iba idan s'chira meita. And the 3rd one, I say, I don't know what time of day it died. I don't know. Was it the time it was borrowed, the time it was rented? And therefore, what happens? Again, this makes it a case. Again, according to Rami bar Hama, it's a case where I actually am obligated because there's kfir b'miktzat and moda b'miktzat. And I actually have to take an oath, right? So I could take an oath to get out of the last element, right? I'll obviously have to pay for the 2nd cow. I won't have to pay for the 1st cow. But the 3rd cow, I have to take an oath about. So, mitoch she'eno yachol l'shava mishalem, right? And since the truth is, I would probably have to take an oath. I would actually have to take an oath about the first one also, because it's a moda b'miktzat, and I was kofir. But since I was moded a part of your claim, I'd have to take an oath that lo ayu dvarim me'olam about the first one, and I'd have to take an oath about the 3rd one that it was in the time of schirut and not the time of she'ela, but I can't take an oath about that third one. And since I can't now, the first one I could take an oath about, and I can basically be exempt. But the third one I can't take an oath about, and since I can't take an oath, I'm going to have to pay. So that's how we explain the Mishnah according to Rami bar Hama. Now we get to the last case, Seifa ba'arba. So now the last case, which started off with 2 cows, now has to have 4 cows. So how does it work? So you claim I gave you 4 cows, and 3 were borrowed. 1 was rented because, right, remember, the Mishnah said 1 was borrowed, 1 was rented. So we still have that, but we have to add 2 more, and the 2 more you're claiming I owe completely, so you're going to say they were all borrowed. Now, 3 out of the 4 died, because that's the case in the Mishnah. It was 2, 1 died, and we don't know which one died. So here we're going to say all 3 of the other ones died, and only 1 was left alive. So now you claim, Amar le Shoel, moving out of Amabet. So I'm sorry, I skipped, right? Sorry. You say, Amar le Arba Porot Natatilcha, Tlat B'Sheila Chad B'Schirut, Umeitu Hanach Tlat B'Sheila. You say, listen, I gave you 4 cows, 3 were borrowed, 1 was rented, and guess which ones died? All 3 that were borrowed. You could have obviously resolved this problem if you had put little tags on your ears or something like that to identify which was which. But we didn't do that. Obviously, it wouldn't have helped in the first 2 cases of half day, unless you did some sort of labeling there. But, in the 2 cows, it would have been a lot easier had you labeled them. But either which way, we don't know. In this case, they didn't do that. And Amar le Shoel, moving out of Amabet, I claim, again, there has to be a complete denial. So I'm going to claim there weren't 4 cows, there were only 3. Chada lo hayu dvarim me'olam. Okay, people sometimes read this, by the way. You can see if you're in the Gemara, it's abbreviated. Lamed Hey Daled Mem. That means Lo Hayu Dvarim Me'olam. This never happened. Some people call it Lahadam because you could read it as the abbreviation Lahadam. So one said, I just like to teach you all sorts of terms in case you don't know them, you become familiar with them. Like Lahadam means, right, Lo Hayu Dvarim Me'olam. That never happened. So complete denial of part of the claim. Chada, about cow number 2, I admit completely. Dishe'ela Meta. The second one that died was definitely rented. But now it would have to be again, because now we have 3 cows that we're debating. 2 were not rented. I said it wrong. Borrowed. 2 were borrowed. 1 was rented. Obviously, if 2 of them died, 1 is definitely going to be the borrowed one. So the third one that died, idach lo yadana, ideschiru meita udekaima deshela, o desheela meita udekaima deschiru, right? So when it comes to the last one, I don't know. The last one that died, was it the schirut one, the rented one, in which case I'm not obligated, or was it the borrowed one, in which case I'd be obligated? And then, the one that's still alive is the opposite. So we don't know which one. And since I don't know which one, again, since it's kfir b'miktzat and moda b'miktzat, I now, right, the moda b'miktzat makes me take the oath. The kfir b'miktzat, in general, according to Rami bar Hama, without that, there would be nothing to talk about. So we now say, since I have to take an oath about the third one, so since I can't take the oath about the third one, I'll have to pay for the third one. Again, the first one, I could take an oath and say, this never happened, I don't know what you're talking about, and I'd be exempt. But the third one, I can't take an oath about because I don't know, and therefore I'll be obligated to pay. So this was really just a repeat of the other. We just had to add another element, another cow, where there's a case of kfirah b'miktzat. Okay, now that was case number 1. And again, what we did with case number 1, a good review, we said this contradicts, it seems to raise a problem with what Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yochanan said, to which we said, okay, we'll have to understand the Mishnah a little bit different. Either we add 1 cow or we add 2 cows to each scenario. And with that, we could get to a moda b'miktzat, and perhaps, according to Rami bar Hama, we need moda b'miktzat and kfirah b'miktzat. Now we're going to move to case number 3. Case number 2 is obvious, because case number 2 is where I come with a definitive claim and you're not sure of your claim. And since I'm the borrower and I'm the one who theoretically would have to pay, but since I'm definitive in my claim that I don't intend to pay, and you're not sure of your claim, then there's no issue at all. Of course, I don't have to pay, because we both have hamotzi mechavero working in a lavaraya, working to my benefit, because you don't have a proof that I have to pay you, and I have a definitive claim versus your non-definitive. So that's easy. Now we're going to go through case number 3 and case number 4. Case number 3, as we learned in the Mishnah, we said we had something left to explain, which is Each of us is very definitive in our claims. So what has to happen here? I have to take an oath that the one that died, okay, that my claim is right, that the one that died is the one that was rented, and therefore I'm exempt because it was meta by onus, and I don't have to pay. And again, that would imply if I don't take that oath, then I would actually have to pay you. Now, why do I have to take an oath here? This is not a case that generally requires an oath. To require an oath, usually it's a moda b'miktzat. Now, there is no moda b'miktzat here. Masha ta'ano lo hodalo. I didn't admit to any part of your claim. You claim the one that died was borrowed, and I say it wasn't borrowed at all. And masha hodalo, what I admit to that it was rented, lo ta'ano, that's not what you're claiming. You're not claiming it was rented. So basically, we're totally right in completely different directions. Usually that wouldn't require an oath. So Amra Ula al Yedei Gilgul. The reason why I have to take an oath is because I anyway have to take an oath. And so we'll talk about in a minute what oath I have to take. Once you're obligated an oath, then often we can tag on to that oath any other oaths that might be potentially needed. So that means, it means basically like this. There's only unique cases where you actually take an oath. That has to exist. If that exists, then there's other times when you might not need to take an oath. If it was just that, you wouldn't need an oath. But since you're already taking an oath on something else, and we're not exactly sure because each of you are making opposite claims, we basically throw in and say you have to take an oath about this as well. Now, what do I have to take an oath about? I claim I was renting it. Now, if I'm renting it, okay, and it dies b'onus, what happens? I'm exempt, but I'm only exempt if I come forward and I take an oath that it died b'onus. I have to say that this died under unexpected circumstances, and therefore I'm exempt because theoretically it could have died. I could have killed it intentionally, right? Or I could have been completely negligent and it died because I was negligent. I could have starved it. Anything could have happened. We don't know why it died. Since it was all in my possession the whole time, I would basically have to take an oath that that's the whole thing with shomer. Right? We don't know. Maybe I'm stealing it. Maybe, right? So in this case, the animal's dead, but it could have died for different reasons. I have to take an oath about how it died. Once I've taken an oath about that, we make me take an oath that it died during the time it was rented. So da'amrle, let's read it inside. You could say to me, ishtabali izi miha de kedarka meta. Look, you at least have to take an oath that it died. You know, it's a little weird. It says darka. Darka is usually made to machmat malacha, which anyone wouldn't be obligated. But I think what it really means here is that it died not because you were negligent, but that it died just in some sort of unexpected circumstances. Umigo de mishtaba de kedarka meta. And once I have to take an oath about how it died, mishtaba nami dischur meta. So then we obligate me to take the oath that it was rented. And it died during the time it was rented, or it was the cow that was rented and not the cow that was borrowed. And then I'll be exempt. Fourth case, and this already, we know what the Gemara is going to say, but I'll say it anyway. If each one says, I don't know, and I'm not sure, but maybe you're obligated to pay me, and maybe I'm not obligated to pay you, right? Each side says. Hama, and what did the Mishna say? Yachloku. We split it 50-50, so I have to pay you half. So Hama, who is this? Sumchus, as I said when we already met the Mishna, this is Sumchus' opinion. That ta'amar, mamona mutal b'safek chokim, when we have a doubt about a monetary claim, we split it 50-50. Okay, but what they're basically trying to say without having saying this explicitly, but the rabbis disagreed. If you remember, the rabbis say, you can't take any money out of me unless you have proof. And therefore, if we're not sure about money, well, I get to keep my money. I don't have to pay you anything. Now we move on to a series of questions. And this seems to be an outgrowth of the fact that we were talking about cases of schirut and sheila, and we'll see what we're now back to sheila b'bali, but cases where, because we talked about half day, or one day, we're going to talk about other questions that come out of a scenario like that, but really not related to what we've been discussing. By Rabbi Abba Bar Mamel, he's going to ask 4 questions, and each one kind of is based on a previous one. And if you answer this, then blah, 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 then I'll have a further follow-up question to you. And then we're going to end with all of them. I'll already tell you, give away the punchline, but we're going to end with teku. We don't really have answers to any of these questions. So Rabbi Abba Bar Mamel asked the following question. Sha'ala beba'alim. Okay, and this is all about, we're back to shmira beba'alim. Okay, so I borrow an animal from you when you're working for me at that moment. So you're working for me, I borrow your item. I'm not obligated, remember, unless I'm poshea, which again, there's a machloket about it, but I'm not obligated. I'm not obligated in onus. Then, before I return the item, let's say I borrowed it for a day. At the end of that day, I go to return it, but then I decide, you know what, I want it for longer, but I'll rent it. I feel bad. I borrowed it this whole time. This time I'll pay you. So, schara shelo bebali. Now, the animal never left my domain. It just stayed there, right? I never gave it back to you and took it back. So the question is, when I now rent it from you, and at this point, you're no longer working for me. So theoretically, it's a new arrangement of a rental without ba'alim, and I should be liable for damages. Whereas when I borrowed it and you were working for me, I wasn't. So the question is, this is two totally, completely separate transactions, in which case, the first part, I wouldn't be obligated if anything happened because of shmir b'ba'alim. And the second part, when I was renting that next day, I'd be obligated for whatever I'm obligated for as a socher, right? Which would be basically gneva v'aveda, right? Assuming a socher is like a shomer sachar, which again, there's a debate, but let's assume, then I'd be obligated if it was stolen. And I wouldn't have the exemption of shmir b'ba'alim because this is something new and you weren't working for me at the time that I took the item to rent. Oh, Dilma, or do we say, wait, but the whole time it was in my domain. And since I started with she'ela, which is a higher level of responsibility, and I moved to schirut, where basically I'm just moving on my obligation. In other words, I'm getting rid of my onus responsibility. I mean, in any case, I didn't have responsibility because it was bebali. But theoretically, a rental should have responsibility for onus and gneva v'aveda, theft and loss. And now I just moved it into schirut, where I got rid of the onus, but I'm now with the gneva v'aveda. But since the whole thing was done, shmira b'ba'alim, this is just viewed as an extension of that. And the whole thing really started when you were working for me, which means that I'm not obligated. Okay, so that's the second possibility. It's just one continuum. And it all started, you were working for me. So if you were working for me, I can't assume any responsibility for this item, even in the continuation. Because from moment one, the gneva v'aveda obligation was there, and then you were exempt from it. So at moment two, when I take upon a new arrangement, but it's still connected to the original one, right? When did the passing on happen? Way back when. And at that point, you were working for me. So theoretically, right, according to option two, I would be exempt. So the question again, just to repeat, do we view these as two separate transactions? And when I come to become a renter, we make a new arrangement basically. And since you weren't working for me at the time, I'm obligated. Or do we view this as one continuum? Now we're going to flip the case and say the following. If you want to say, started with borrowing, ended with renting. Well, renting is just like borrowing. It just, you remove a little responsibility, but it's really a continuation because you were chayaving gneva v'aveda at the beginning and you're still chayaving gneva v'aveda. So it's just one continuum. And again, in this case, you happen not to be obligated in stealing. So you still won't be obligated in stealing because it was all beba'alim when the owner was working for me. Okay, but what if it was the reverse? Schara beba'alim, if I first rented it and you were working for me at the time, and therefore I didn't assume responsibility for theft and loss, and then sha'ala shelo beba'alim, and then before returning it, right, the time was up, and then I decide to borrow it. Now, here, this might be more viewed as a separate action because she'ela v'schirut v'aday lo shaychet. When we say borrowing, for sure can't be viewed as a continuum because borrowing adds additional obligations. Now I'm obligated if onus happens, which I wasn't in the beginning. Since I take on more responsibility when I borrow, for sure it's not going to be connected to the first action. And for sure then it won't be considered beba'alim and I won't be exempt. Oh, or perhaps, because we're asking questions here, maybe you could look at it as dilma kevan d'shayche b'miktzat kevan d'shayche b'kuladami. Maybe since there is something that continues, meaning when I was renting, I was liable for theft and loss. So now that I'm borrowing, it's true, I'm also obligated for unexpected damages. But my gneva v'aveda obligation continues. And therefore, this is viewed as a continuum. And therefore, if I was exempt in the beginning, because it was beba'alim, then even though now it wasn't done beba'alim, it's just viewed as a continuum. So we have both sides again. And now we're going to say, third question. In Timtza Lomar, okay, how much more complicated can you get? We did both options. Well, we're going to have three things. We're going to have a zigzag. Started with one, went to the other, and went back to the other. Okay, so, and we're going to do it in both directions. So those are our last two questions. In Timtza Lomar, Lo Amrinan, you don't say, Kevan d'shaycha b'mitzah, kevan d'shaycha b'kuladam. Schira to shoel doesn't work. Okay, if you go to a higher level of obligation, if you're to say, we don't know, but if you were to answer the previous question, right? She'ela to schira continues because you're obligated with everything you were obligated before, just maybe less, but the obligation that you were obligated is still effective. But if she'ela to schira, since you add on, schira to she'ela, you go from renting to borrowing, you add on responsibility, for sure you can't say, this is definitely a new thing, and it's not bebalim, you're going to be obligated. But she'ela sha'ala bebalim uschara shelo bebalim v'chazar b'sha'alama. What if you started as a borrower, then moved to renting, and then moved to borrowing? Now, if we look just at the cut of rental to borrow, right, it wouldn't work. But since you started borrowing, and the borrowing at first was done bebalim, then when you rented and borrowed later, it wasn't bebalim anymore. Do we say, here go our two sides, Mam, Hadar Akila She'ela Ledukta. When you borrow in stage 3, let's just say days. Day 1, you were borrowing with the owner there, meaning the owner was working for you. Day 2, you rented without the owner. And day 3, you borrowed without the owner. But do we view, since you originally, now remember, the item never leaves my property. I borrowed it, it stays in my property, then I rent it, then I become a borrower again. So does this third day kind of connect back to the original day? It's as if an extension of the borrowing I did on day 1, and the borrowing I did on day 1 was with the owner there, and therefore I was exempt. So do we pull that exemption, kind of ignore the schirut in the middle? Or Dilma, if skala schirut bene bene, or we say, no, you can't view she'ela as a continuation of the other agreement. By the way, this assumes that if I went from borrowing and then decide to borrow it for longer, even though you're not working for me at the moment I borrowed it again, right? Extended the borrowing agreement, obviously I'm extending the original borrowing agreement. And if I was exempt from responsibility the first time, I'll obviously be exempt the second time, even if you're no longer working for me. But here there was a schirut in the middle. So maybe that breaks it. Okay. And again, the schirut was without the owner. So therefore that whole thing of with the owner is broken. The fact that I go on day 3 back to borrowing doesn't connect anymore with the first. That's the deliberation. And fourth question, you can see where we're going. What if you started renting, then you went to borrowing, and then you went to renting? Now, do we say, look, your schirut connects with the original schirut. So even though obviously the she'ela, we said, is a new thing, and it breaks the schirut and breaks the baalim, but then you went back to be a renter. So again, perhaps we view that linked to the original rental agreement. O Dilma, if sakala she'ela bene bene, or do we say no, the she'ela breaks it? And what you would say is like this. Maybe in the previous one, going from borrowing to renting, since theoretically, maybe that could have been viewed as a continuum, even though we weren't sure, right? Maybe then you could say it doesn't break it. But when you go to borrowing in the middle, all the more so it should break it. Or maybe not, because in the end, you're reverting back to renting, and maybe it could be a continuation of that original renting agreement. A little bit of a dizzying question. And again, the Gemara answers with a less than satisfying answer of take. At least I warned you in the beginning. Okay, new Mishnah, and with this we'll end our day of learning. Hashoel et hapara. The question of this Mishnah is, and we learned this already, at what point does the shoel assume the responsibilities of onus and really everything? And the question is, well, obviously, when I get the item, I'll be the borrower and I'll be responsible. What if it's sent by messenger? And this goes back to like Gitin and who sends the messenger and all that. Well, the question is, at what point do I assume responsibility when this item's on its way to me or on its way back home to you? Hashoel et hapara. So I borrow a para. Vishilchalo biyad beno biyad avdo biyad shlo. I borrow it from you and you send it with either your son, your slave, or your messenger. O biyad beno biyad avdo biyad shlucho shoel. Or you decide to send me the item. In other words, we made an arrangement that I'm going to borrow your car, and you decide to send it either with your messengers or with someone who's kind of from my family, my side. Okay, someone maybe who's a messenger of mine usually, but I had nothing to do with it. I didn't say, please send it to me now. I didn't say, great, send it, I'm ready for it. I didn't say anything. If you did it, it doesn't matter who the messenger belongs to, umeta, and the animal dies, patur, I'm exempt from responsibility. However, now we're going to have two different cases here. Amar lo hashoel, either if I say to you, shachala biyad bini, biyad avdi, biyad shluchi, I say, send it with my son, send it, or my child, send it with my slave, send it with my messenger. O biyad bincha, biyad avdecha, biyad shluchacha, or I say, send it to me through your son, your child, through your slave, through your messenger. Again, it's irrelevant whose side the messenger is on or whose messenger it is. The point is, if I initiate and say, send it to me now, then I become immediately responsible, which we haven't seen yet in the Mishnah, but we'll see in a minute when we get through case 2. Case 2 of section 2, right? We have case 3 really in the Mishnah. Osha amar lo hamashil, or you said to me, Hareini mishalcha lecha biyad bini biyad avdi biyad avdi. Biyad bini biyad avdi biyad shluchi, o biyad bincha biyad avdecha biyad shluchacha. Or you say, Michelle, I'm going to send you the car right now, either with one of your own messengers or with one of my messengers. And I say, yes, please send it. As soon as I agree, or case before was I initiated, and then v'meita, if it dies, I'm immediately obligated, even though the car never got to me. Okay, so I could be obligated in those cases just because it's like a woman getting her get when she sends a shaliach to get her get, right? There it's a little bit more complicated. It has to be, right, accept my get, not go get my get. If you remember, we had a whole thing there. And the same with the reverse, meaning on the way home, when I return the car, if I return it on my own, well, right, and by sending one of my shlichim or one of your shlichim, sending it with one of them, but I decide to return it without you agreeing or anything, then it's my responsibility. But if you send someone to go pick up your car, it becomes your responsibility. Or if I say I'm giving it back and you say, okay, send it with one of my shlichim or send it with one of your shlichim, then you've accepted responsibility back and I'm no longer responsible. So that's pretty straightforward. Okay, we're going to now just review our daf. We started with this big contradiction that the Mishnah seems to contradict the machloket from Nachman and Rabbi Yochanan side of the machloket about mana libiyadcha, right? And deny, one person is definitive and the other one denies. They say hamatzim chaver alav haraya. So we have to explain that the Mishnah, according to them, must be in a case. Again, it's only according to them that we have to say this. The Mishnah must be a case where there's supposed to be an oath, and they just couldn't take the oath because they don't know. The whole claim is, I don't know. And we went through what the possible cases could be where we would have modeh b'miktzat, how many more cows we would need to add, and that really depends on whether it's just modeh b'miktzat you need, or do you also need, because of a different issue. Remember, that issue is unrelated. That's just Rami bar Hama's whole view of shomrim, that it's only when you're kofer b'miktzat and modeh b'miktzat. And then we'd have to add an extra cow besides the one we added, the first explanation. And then we had why there's an oath in case number 3 in the Mishnah, where both of us are definitive and claim, why do I have to take an oath? Why don't we just say, hamatzim chaver alav haraya? And the reason is gilgul shevua. I'm already chayv a shevua for something else, so we insist I make a shevua on the other. And then when in neither case, we split 50-50, and that's only Sumchus, the rabbis disagree. Then we have 4 questions about a case. Does shmir b'balin continue when you move from sheila to schirut or schirut to sheila if the first one, the workers, the guy was working for you, and in the second case, they were not working for you anymore. Do we view this as one continuum, or is there a new thing going on here? And then we had cases of one to the other, or back to the original one, and would it apply there? And then we ended with, at what point does the schirut start, and at what point does the schirut end? Right? One point is the borrowing start and the borrowing end when you send the item via a messenger. With that, we finish today's daf, wishing everyone a good day, and reminder that there's pictures and they'll be useful if you look at them. It helps organize the cases in your mind. Have a great day.